my background comes from teaching, and you know, one of the funniest things ever as a teacher is when you go around and you count the number of drawings that you find on desks. I know this will be shocking, but typically there's only one thing boys draw on desks, and it looks like that Amazon rocket ship. But I mean, there's times like the one day, my buddies, Kip, he said he went around and he counted, and it was like dozens and dozens. He was like up to 30 something rocket ships that he saw boys draw. And I'm like, oh, there's a weird high school like thought. But doodling to me was this thing that we as teachers often tell people not to do, which is really shameful, because if we look at a lot of what we're doing in education, we're stamping out the most natural parts of kids. One of the things that really kind of bothered me when we moved to Texas, this happens in Michigan too, but it was specific when we moved to Texas, is that my son got 2 math classes, 2 English classes, and no gym classes, and he was in middle school. And so like, why are we taking play away from kids? And the other thing is like, you know, don't doodle, don't scribble, don't daydream. Like, the thing is like, paying attention in school is very, very difficult. I mean, you're getting there at 7 in the morning and you're not leaving until 4 in the afternoon. That is longer than a work day. And just to make the point is like, we used to have this professional development where we would shadow a classroom all day. So we would go through a kid's schedule through the whole day, learn what they learned, and then see what it was like for the kid, and where the difficulties were, where they could draw energy. And I'll tell you this, that teachers couldn't make it through the day, that by lunch, they would just be like, we're done. And I'm like, we expect 15-year-old kids to do this, 16-year-old kids, and we can't even do this as adults, but we're only operating in our little world. And so like, this idea of the desktop, the doodling, this question of like, what is the point in terms of this? But what I want to hit on today is specifically, what's the point kind of in life? And that's a pretty mean, bold question. That question was even like brought as Greeks. This is from the myth of Sisyphus. And this story is really amazing in a lot of ways, that when we look at the old stories going all the way back to Gilgamesh, if you study the patterns of the stories, one, there's always, you know, the hero, the villain, the battle against nature. There's a lot of themes that Carl Jung and others have, Joseph Campbell, have pulled apart, that there's something deeper going on in stories, and we'll get to that more later. But the myth of Sisyphus, that's going to be fun to say, of Sisyphus, points to something that's really incredible. So I'm gonna give you a generalized version of the story of what happened to him, and then I want to break it down in terms of like what this punishment really meant. So here's the story of Sisyphus. Long ago in Corinth, there lived a king named Sisyphus. Oh my God, how many times do I gotta say that? He was clever, too clever for his own good. He outwitted rival kings, tricked the gods, and even managed to bind death in chains so that no mortal could die. For a time, it seemed like he had beaten fate itself. But no man can outwit eternity. The gods decided his arrogance deserved the harshest punishment imaginable. Not torture of the body, but torture of the soul. They set Sisyphus at the base of a mountain with a stone as heavy as despair. His task to push it to the summit. With straining muscles and unbreakable will, he would heave it upward. Sweat poured, veins bulged, and hope flickered with each step closer to the top. But just as the peak neared, the boulder slipped, tumbled, and thundered back to the ground. His work was undone. His efforts a race, his struggle meaningless. And so forever, Sisyphus would walk back down the hill to begin again. His life became the symbol of endless toil without reward. I don't remember the exact quote, but above Auschwitz, I believe it said something to the effect of like, hard work frees the soul. But one of the things that they did in the concentration camps was they would have these 50 or 100-pound bags of salt or dirt, and they would have people like pick them up, carry them across the yard, and set them down and restack them on the other side. And when they finished moving all those pounds of salt and dirt, what they would have them do is move them all back. And the idea was, the torture was of the soul. And I think that part of Sisyphus is really powerful, of like, yeah, there's toil of the body. Everybody who's done a hard day's worth of work knows what it is to like collapse on the couch or fall into bed and just crash out. But there's another toil that we don't often talk about, which is the toil of the soul. They could have physically tortured him. They could have sent him to hell. They could have done any types of torture. But they said specifically that torture that he thought the worst possible torture for him possible was to torture his soul by making him do something that's meaningless. And that's the word I want us to focus on here for the next 15, 20 minutes is just to look at the idea of what it feels to live a meaningless life. And to look at the negative, it makes us understand that if there is a negative, there must be a positive. Because there are philosophers that argued all throughout time, including about Sisyphus. Albert Camus famously argued that meaning in life is absurdity, that there is no meaning in life. But the idea is that argument counteracts itself, because to say something is not meaningful means that there must be something that is meaningful. And so I want to go back to school. And this is a stat that came out, I think, a year or two ago. And this one shows us the torture of the soul. A Harvard Graduate School of Education study found that nearly 3 in 5 adults, about 58%, reported experiencing little or no meaning or purpose in their lives. And that was an immediate thing. This is typically upon graduation, we're looking at 40 to 60% of kids are leaving high school feeling that life is no longer meaningful or purposeful. That is a very, very dangerous stat. And as we go through this, my goal is to prove how dangerous this narrative is. But more importantly, by understanding the depths of the darkness, is the importance of the light. And so when we look at this, it's stark. Now, I'm going to show you something. This is a picture. I've got a couple pictures here I'm going to show you. I generated this picture in AI. Here's the prompt I gave it, literally the prompt I gave it. I said to the Google AI and to ChatGPT, I said, I need a picture of what it feels like to be a teenager graduating high school today based on the current psychological data. Listen to what I didn't tell it like what they feel, or I didn't give it any direction in the feeling. I just specifically said, I need a picture of what it feels like to be a teenager graduating high school today based on current psychological data. And that's the face. Well, apparently everyone graduating, it looks like white male. But other than that, like this kid's face, this is the face of meaninglessness, of where is this future going? So then I did this on ChatGPT, and these are the two pictures it turned out. That's heartbreaking to me. This is what it looks like to be a high school graduate today. And so when I'm looking at the feeling of meaninglessness, it's looking at a future and not believing that there's a story there for you. Now, again, we're going to go dark, and then I'm going to lift that a little bit. So just stick with me here a minute. So there is something wrong. This is a piece of graffiti. I believe this was done by Banksy. Keep your coins, I want change. We'll come back to that later. There's something wrong. Here are 4 pieces of data that I found today that I thought were there. When you guys, if you've heard me talk about story, you hear me talk about the deaths of despair. The deaths from suicide, drug overdoses, and alcohol-related diseases more than doubled between 1999 and 2021. And again, people are trying to relate that to COVID and things like that, but understand this has been going on long before COVID and has continued after COVID. But the idea is more than doubled. Well, that's shocking. There's been a 142% increase in deaths linked to alcohol, drugs, and suicide from 2002 to 2022. 142%. And when we look at things, obviously, like the harder drugs, like the opiates and things like that, that number I think has gone up somewhere to 400%. Anyway, in 2024, so last year, 78% of U.S. respondents to Mental Health America's online mental health screening scored positive for moderate to severe of a mental health condition. 78% of the United States. When I was teaching, this is one of the things that there are several points in teaching when I thought, what is happening? But I remember we sat in a meeting, this was post 2008, there were massive budget cuts. And one of the things the district asked us to do was cut our medical costs. So we had to pay into our medical system. Of course, everybody has to do that now. But also they were like, hey, if you guys can go to the doctor less and use less prescription drugs, and then they put up there the top 3 drugs that were being used by over 3/4 of our staff. The top 2 were antidepressants, and the third one was attention deficit drugs. I'm like, what is going on with the people I work with? But when I see things like this, 78% are a moderate to severe symptoms of a mental health situation. That is scary. And then the last one, psychological research indicates that 91% of people experience purpose anxiety. That is a frustrating struggle to define their own life's purpose. So it gets dark. So let's walk out of that a little bit. Let's look at this question of like, is there any point to life? You know, this argument against meaninglessness. I'm going to argue, like in this next story, of that the idea of pain points us to purpose. So like Nick and I talk about in story all the time, we're trying to shift pain to purpose because pain must mean that there's a purpose. And I believe that the existential pain that we're experiencing up here, of all of this data, of all of these kids, is because it's linked to purpose. It's funny that we're not linking this to like income. We're not linking this into race. We're not linking to this. And those things will play a part. But the number one thing that's being linked back to is a lack of meaning and purpose. So when I taught leadership, I came across the story of this guy named JR. He was a graffiti artist in Paris, and he was this punk kid. And so what they used to do is they would go up on the roofs of Paris, and you can see the Eiffel Tower there in the background, and they would graffiti their names. And he would just graffiti his initials, JR. And when he was asked why he was doing that, he said, I don't want the world to forget that I was here. And the importance and the significance of this young, like this is 2000, I think 1 or 2. And we're looking at this deep down into like where we are today. This existential crisis has been here for a long time, that people feel that their lives are meaningless, that what we're experiencing in the world is this idea that what if my life doesn't matter? What if my individuality doesn't like ring with the rest of the universe? So when we look at this idea of this kid climbed up on the rooftops, risked life and death, right? There's no special armors. I mean, these guys wearing tennis shoes and jeans just to spray paint his name so that the world would not forget that he existed. But what happened in JR was it sparked something more in him. He's like, no, I'm going to make sure the world knows I'm here. Right? There's that hidden value. Like, I am here. I want people to know this. So what he did is he took those pictures. He found a camera on the subway, and he started taking pictures of what they were doing. And then what he would do is he'd print them, post them on the wall. Then he'd paint these squares around them and connect them. You can see his name right there, JR, like to tell people, like, we're here. We are forgotten, but we're here. So like they would create this art all over Paris. I mean, he's got dozens of pictures like this, and they would come and they'd take these pictures down, and he's like, they could take our picture, but they couldn't take our frame. And as his story evolved, he started taking pictures of others and posting them. And then I think it was in 2005, there were riots in Paris where the poor were uprising because they were being left behind. And of course, these are mostly minority populations in Paris. They're mostly immigrants. And so they were almost violently protesting, right? Setting things on fire, just like we experience here, where they're just like, you need to know that we're here. And what's interesting is when JR was sitting down watching the news, this photo that he took of the people from that area, from that hood, that Paris hood, ended up on the news because he took the picture of them and he posted it up on the wall. But what he struggled with was what the news was presenting was the worst of them. And JR said, these are not perfect people, but they're good people trying to do best for themselves and their families. And so what he did is he took his little camera, he just had this small camera, and what he did is he went down there and he's like, no, I'm going to show the people who these people really are. So here's this guy with this hidden value that he's forgotten. His life is meaningless. And he was fighting to bring meaning to the people of the city. So what he did was he would get real close to the pictures and he would say, how does the world see you? And they would pretend and make a face, either like angry or as a joke or silly, of how they felt like they were being portrayed. And so then he took those pictures and he blew them up into these giant canvases. And this is the government building, and they put them right on the government building. So they're like, if you're going to call these people out this way, I need you to see them. Like, just like he wanted the world to see him, he brought his camera and he's like, you're going to see them. And this really took off. So he went from being a graffiti artist to being a photographer and a graffiti artist. And he decided to kind of take his show on the world because he asked himself the question. He's like, well, if through this camera lens, if I can make people see people, what if I can make people all over the world see other people's stories? And I will tell you this, I would bet in your life you've come across a JR picture, because I've seen them in San Antonio. They've been in Miami. They're in Detroit. I'm sure they've been in Houston. because he is now displayed all over the world, and people have picked up on his art, and they've done this in other places. We actually did this in our high school once. Things weren't going real smooth for me in the high school. So we did this with our students. We had students go around and take pictures real close up of other kids, we blew up their pictures so they were like huge, like poster size, and we put them on every single door in the school. It's funny, we got in trouble until we actually got reviewed by an outside source the next day, and the guy came in and he's like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in the school. It clearly shows how much you value your students that you put their faces up all over the school. And then the principal was like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, whatever. But of course, this often gets rejected by the system. But for the people, it's a big deal. So this worked in Paris. This idea worked to bring his site, like let people's faces shine. And so then he took it on the road. So of course he goes to the most contentious place in the world. This was in the pre-2010. So he went to the wall that separates Palestine and Israel. So this is like the Gaza Strip where the wall separates. Of course, we know everything that's going on there now. But what he did was he went around and took pictures of dual people. So if they drove a taxi in Palestine, he'd take a picture of a taxi driver in Jerusalem or in Israel. If they were barbers in one place, he took a barber there, and he put their pictures, you can see, right next to each other based on like what they did and the services they provided. And we can see the religious people here. And he said he just put them up. He just put them up. He had people helping him put up, nuns help put him up, all this stuff. He did all this work, and then he had them sit there. And what would happen is, of course, it's art, so people start interacting with it. And they're like, what is this? And he's like, oh, these are Israelis and these are Palestinians. I put their pictures next by their careers. And then they're like, well, which one's which? And he goes, that's the point. Like, the question is like, we in our minds create these differences. We create this brokenness in the world of like identities of making an us versus them. And he's like, but when we really look at people, if we just see people as people, we don't know the differences. We just see human beings. And so he was trying to kind of bring that down. So then there was this event in this was in Brazil, in what are they called, the favelas, like the poorest areas. So these are the poorest areas of the poor, where there's no building codes, there's no government regulations. They build these buildings right on top of each other throughout the hills because that's all they're allowed to do. They're given a contained space. Well, in the 2000s, the military came in to try to attempt to control it, and they just went around and they started shooting young men. Without warrant, without cause. They said the cause was it was drugs and things like that, but they went around and they decimated like dozens of young men. And so when the moms of those young men went to the government, they wouldn't listen to them. When they went to the police, they wouldn't listen to them because no one wanted to see the favelas. So when JR went there, he's like, these boys have been forgotten, and because they're dead, but he said that the moms have not been forgotten. And so what he did is he's like, you are going to see them, because they try to put them into the corner so they don't see them, which we often do with the groups of people that we don't want to see. And what he did is he took their pictures of all the moms and he put their eyes on all the buildings. You can see like how big he did this. All these buildings are covered in the mothers who lost their children. He put their eyes on there, and he called this women are heroes. And he did this throughout the world in places where women were secondary citizens. He's like, you are going to see women. He got stoned and attacked in certain places for putting up pictures of the women, even if they were in the burqas or whatever. But he put them up so like, you're going to see these people. Because anyone who's played the label game or done anything like that knows that the most painful label in the label game is to be invisible. And these women felt invisible. You can't see it in this picture, but there's other ones where even the steps up the favela, they would put the women's faces on there. So they went throughout. So no matter where you traveled around this, you would see this. You would see the favela, you would see the women, and through their eyes, you would see their children. And then this is a place he went in Kenya. What was the exact name? It was Kibera, which is one of the largest slums in all of Africa. And so he tried something different here. So instead of using paper, he used like a tarp material. So he's like, well, why don't we use the pictures and do something that's visible? And he put this on these buildings. He put it on these trains. There's a whole bunch of pictures. But this specific picture here, what he did is he put their eyes, because the people told him stories that they believed that God, they were so poor that God couldn't even see them. So he put the pictures on the roof because they wanted God to see them. and to let God know. And if you look at Google Maps and you go over this area, I don't know if it's still, you can still see it today, but you could zoom in and you could see the artwork that he did there. The eyes of God, you know. Anyway. So JR, let me stay here for a second. JR took his hidden value. He took his deficit, this pain of meaning, and what he's done for the world is found a way to bring that meaning into the world. He's meeting people in the pain, in their poverty of wealth, their poverty of loss and pain and sadness, the women who lost their children, the poverty of equality. Like he steps in that place and he's just like, I'm going to see you. That's it. I'm going to see you. And any of us who felt that moment of sadness and isolation in our life, that when somebody who's finally seen us for us, the power that gives us is meaningful. It's meaningful to be seen. And so I use this story to show, like, this guy who's felt this pain sees this pain in others and has this ability to be like, if I'm the only one, I'm going to see you and I'm going to make others see you. So this guy right here, this would be a fun Jeopardy question. But I have to look this up because I can't remember. This guy's name is Vivek Murthy. He was the U.S. Surgeon General for the last 4 years. So that means, like, with the change of administration, January was his last his stint. He ended being the Surgeon General. The Surgeon General is the one who sets the course for health in the United States during their term. And so at the end of his term, so January of this year, he gave a goodbye speech. And what he did was address what he felt was most wrong with the United States. So this guy has been the top medical leader in the United States for 4 years. And he looked at everything that he learned over the last 4 years, all the stuff he's dealt with post-COVID, cancer, other viruses, all the disruption that has come because of post-COVID, heart disease, everything that's going on, diabetes, weight, everything that's been happening in the United States. And he goes, this is my prescription for the United States. That's what he called his last speech, the prescription for the United States. And here's the funny thing. He didn't talk about any of the stuff that we would equate with health. He didn't talk about food. He didn't talk about cancer. He didn't talk about disease. He didn't talk about viruses. He didn't talk about COVID. Of all the things that he could have ranked on his list that were the most serious health threats to the United States, he said there were 3. 1, loneliness. 2, isolation, which looks like loneliness, but the distance that we have from each other, that we've become an us versus them society. And then 3, the lack of meaning and purpose in his life, in our lives. That was his final prescription. He said, as a society, we need to look at our lives and we got to remedy these 3 things. These are the most important things that we have to remedy. Again, not food, not heart disease, not pestilence, not anything. It was relationships, being connected to others, and giving to others, and meaning and purpose. And this was a quote right from his speech. He says, of all the things, he says, yet all 3 drivers of fulfillment have diminished in many of our lives. 1/3 of adults and about half of young people are struggling with loneliness. The majority of our country is not engaged in formal or informal service to each other. And a majority of young adults say they have little or no sense of purpose or meaning in life. There's another Banksy. When I looked up the most famous Banksy, if you don't know Banksy, you should look him up. Very cool. But when I looked up the most famous Banksy picture, this is the one that came up. This is on postcards and things like this. Again, this is probably something you've come across. And this is just a graffiti artist in England. And in this picture, it's heartbreaking. It goes back to this idea of, like, what are we doing for the generations after us? Like, we're losing meaning. And because we as a generation are losing meaning in our lives, we're denying meaning in the people coming after us. I'm a Gen Xer. When I was coming up, we were told, work hard, get a good education, and you're going to get a good job. And that was largely true. But that story that has been the American dream for so long is no longer believed. Like, my kids don't believe that. They don't believe. Now, they don't know what their other option is. They're still going to school. They still work hard. But they're just like, it feels to them that they have to get ahead of everyone else who's trying to get that same job. They feel like it's an us versus them culture now, that they're no longer working together as a community to advance themselves, that it's us for them. And I was telling some other people, like my son just moved into his apartment, 3 roommates, 3 other guys, and none of them talk to each other. Like, what is happening? And people want to blame technology. They want to blame the culture wars. They want to blame politics. But the truth of the matter is like it's a meaning crisis. We've lost this sense of relation. We've lost this sense of connectedness, and we've lost this sense of purpose. And the argument in that is if we lost it, it means that it's something important for it to be there. And that's the part. Like, it's easy to say we've lost it, right? Like this girl with the heart balloon, it's gone. But it means at some point she possessed it, that there's something within us to possess it. Why are high school kids clamoring about a loss of meaning unless they know that it's meant to be there? See, we're not just flesh and blood. We're spiritual beings. And the argument is when we lack meaning, whether that's at Auschwitz or whether that's pushing a boulder up a hill, or whether that's going to high school, it means we're being denied something. If you're thirsty, it means your body needs water. But if you lack meaning, then it's that simple. We must find what is meaningful. And that's where we have to begin to look. Because people want to sit there and argue like, well, does life have any meaning? Well, of course it does, because we have a word for it. Like, it's insane for us to think that this isn't the most important thing. The Surgeon General of the United States said it was the greatest health risk to everyone in this country, was a lack of meaning and purpose and connection. So what we need to look for is, what do we aim at then? What's the solution to that problem?